Greetings, dear listeners. My name is Serikbayev Syrym, and today our broadcast dedicated to Pyrrhon of Elida. Pyrrhon was a starting point for a philosophical movement known as Pyrrhonism that flourished beginning several centuries after his own life. This later Pyrrhonism was one of a few major traditions of skeptical thought in the Greco-Roman world, the other being located in Plato's academy during much of the Hellenistic period. Perhaps the central question about Pyrrhon is whether or not what extent he himself was a skeptic in a later Pyrrhonist mold. The later Pyrrhonists claimed inspiration from him, and as we shall see, there's undeniably some basis for this. But it does not follow that Pyrrhon's philosophy was identical to that of this later movement, or even that the later Pyrrhonists thought that it was identical. The claims of independences that are expressed by or attributed to members of a later Pyrrhonist tradition are broad and general in character and do not in themselves point to any particular reconstruction of Pyrrhon's thought. It is necessary, therefore, to focus on the meager evidence bearing explicitly upon Pyrrhon's own ideas and attitudes. Now we read this evidence will also, of course, affect our conception of Pyrrhon's relations with his own philosophical contemporaries and predecessors. Life. Pyrrhon appears to have lived from around 365–360 BC until around 257–270 BC. We have several reports of philosophers from whom he learned, the most significant and the most reliable of which concern his association with Anaxarchus of Abdera. Alongside Anaxarchus and several other philosophers, he allegedly accompanied Alexander the Great on his expedition to India. We are told that in the course of his expedition he encountered some naked wise men. Diogenes Laertius claims that his philosophy developed as a result of this meeting, but it is not clear what basis, if any, he has for this assertion. In any case, after his return to Greece, Pyrrhon did espouse a philosophy that attracted numerous followers. Of him the most important was Timon of Philipus. The travel writer Pausanias reports seeing a statue of him in a marketplace in Pyrrhon's hometown of Elis in Peloponnese. Diogenes also reports that he was made high priest, and that in his honor philosophers were made exempt from city's taxation. While Pausanias' report is easier to accept as face value than Diogenes, both suggest that at least locally he achieved considerable celebrity. However, there is no good reason to believe that a Pyrrhonist movement continued beyond his own immediate followers. It was not until the 1st century BC that Pyrrhonism became the name of an ongoing philosophical tradition. Ancient sources and the nature of the evidence. While the exception of poetry allegedly written while on Alexander's expedition, which as far as we can tell did not survive that expedition, Pyrrhon wrote nothing. Was therefore obligated to try to reconstruct his philosophy from reports of others. Unfortunately, the reports that we have are fragmentary and in many cases of doubtful reliability. Pyrrhon's follower Timon wrote numerous poems and prose works, but of these only fragments and in some cases second-hand reports survive. It is likely that much of what we heard about Pyrrhon is later sources also derives indirectly from Timon, but it is frequently not possible to judge in individual cases whether or not this is so. Other difficulties concern Timon's evidence are first that he writes as devoted rather than a natural reporter, and second that the great majority of Timon's fragments derives from a poem called Siloi and consist of satirical thumbnail sketches of other philosophers rather than any kind of direct expositions of Pyrrhon's outlook. Nevertheless, Timon is clearly the most important and the most trustworthy source of information about Pyrrhon. Of the evidence from Timon, one piece is especially important. This is a summary by the peripatetic Aristocles of Messene of an account by Timon of Pyrrhon's most general philosophical attitudes. It is generally agreed that this passage must be centerpiece of any interpretation of Pyrrhon's philosophy. Whoever wants to live well must consider these three questions. First, how are ethical matters affairs topics by nature? Second, what attitude should we adopt towards them? Secondly, what will be the outcome for those who have these attitudes? Pyrrhon's answer is that for a pragmata they all are indifferentiated by a logical differentia, unstable, unbalanced, not measurable, and unjudged, unfixed, undesirable. Therefore, neither our sense perceptions nor our views, theories, beliefs tell us the truth or lie. So we certainly should not rely on them. Rather, we should be without views, uninclined toward this side or that, and unwavering in our refusal to choose, saying about every single one that is no more is that, it is not, or it both is and is not, or it neither is not, is not. Influence on Pyrrhon. Many different philosophical antecedents have been claimed for Pyrrhon. Since we know very little about which philosophical currents Pyrrhon may have been acquainted with, such claims are bound to be in large measure speculative. There are, however, a couple of exceptions to this. As noted at this outset, Pyrrhon was associated with Anaxarchos and was reported to have encountered some unnamed Indian thinkers. The little that we know of Anaxarchos seems to suggest that his philosophy had a good deal in common with Pyrrhon's. Diogenes Laertius ascribes to him an attribute to apatheia or eukolia, freedom from emotion and contentedness, as noted earlier. Apatheia is used in some sources to describe Pyrrhon's attitude as well, and the combination of two terms seems to describe something close to the state cultivated by Pyrrhon. We also hear from Sextus Empiricus that Anaxarchus linked existing things to stage painting and took them to be similar to the things which strike us while asleep or insane. This has often been taken as an early expression of form of epistemological skepticism. But it may also be taken as ontological comment on the insustainability of the world around us. It is things as opposed to our impressions of things that are assimilated to our stage sets and the contents of dreams and fantasies. Either way, the remark looks like an interpretation of Pyrrhon's position in the Aristocles passage. The first reading conforms to the epistemological interpretation of that passage, and the second to the metaphysical interpretation. It appears then that Pyrrhon may have borrowed to a considerable extent from Anaxarchus. There's, however, no indication that Anaxarchus drew a connection between his view of the nature of things and his attitude of emotional contentment, such as we have seen that Pyrrhon did. Pyrrhon's influence. Pyrrhon's relation to the later Pyrrhonists has already been discussed. Given the importance of Pyrrhonism in earlier modern philosophy, Pyrrhon's indirect influence may be brought of a very considerable, but beyond his being adopted as figurehead in later Pyrrhonism itself, never a widespread philosophical movement. Pyrrhon seems to have had very little impact in the ancient world after his own lifetime. Both Cicero and Seneca refer to Pyrrhon as nail-head figure without a following, and the surviving testimony do not contradict this impression. It is possible that he had some influence on the norm of skepticism adopted by Archelaus and other members of the Academy. The extent to which this is so is disputed and difficult to assess. It is also possible that Epicureans, whose aim was also ataraxia, learned something from Pyrrhon. There is also indications of an association between Pyrrhon and Nafcianus, the teacher of Epicurus. But if so, the extent of Epicureans' borrowing was strictly limited. For them, ataraxia is to be attained by coming to understand that the universe consists of atoms and void. And the Epicureans' attitude towards the sense was anything but one of mistrust. And now our broadcast is over. Please subscribe to this channel. That was your host, Serikbayev Syrym. Goodbye.